You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today we have another show lined up for y'all. We're going to talk to our special guest, Charlene Madden. She is not just a speaker, an author, but she's also an empowerment coach. And we're going to learn all about her mission and also her story. First and foremost, I want to welcome Ms. Charlene to the show and say, how you doing?
I am awesome. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
And you have a powerful story. And before we talk about your story, tell our audience a little bit about yourself that leads up to your powerful story.
Yeah. As you said, I am a speaker, an author, and a women's empowerment coach. I live in beautiful British Columbia, Canada, so I'm right in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And I am a person who has tried to take all of the struggles and trauma that I've gone through, and coming from my darkest point, I've tried to take that and share it with other people so that they don't have to struggle for as long as I did, because I struggled for a long time, and my goal is to try to save people from some of that pain and heartache.
And you experienced over 9 years of trauma. And with that, you also had to endure domestic violence and mental illness and suicidal thoughts. Tell the audience the story of how all this started for you.
Yeah, my story starts when I was just a little girl. I was born into a pretty dysfunctional family. My dad was a pretty severe alcoholic, and he tended to be violent when he drank. And unfortunately, I had half brothers who were older than my sister and I. I was 3.5, my sister was 7, and my half brothers were 11. And when he drank, he took out his rage on them because they weren't biologically his sons. So my mom was forced with a really difficult decision, and that was, do I pack up all my kids and leave the marriage? This is back in the early 70s, so it's a different time. Do I stay and possibly have one of my sons killed while my husband's in a drunken rage? And so she decided to leave. But unfortunately, my dad wouldn't let her take all the kids. She could take the boys, but she couldn't take my sister and I. And it was a difficult decision to make. But my mom decided to try to save the kids that she could, and she left with my brothers. And with my dad being such an alcoholic, he was in no state to raise 2 little girls. So he contacted very quickly my grandparents and asked if they would take us in. And my grandmother did not skip a beat. She said, absolutely. And to me, my grandmother is probably the closest thing to a saint that there was. She was the mom that I didn't have growing up. And she was very dedicated and devoted to raising my sister and I. And as wonderful as my grandmother was, though, my grandfather was a pedophile. So very quickly after being placed in my grandparents' care, again, I was 3.5, I started experiencing sexual abuse at his hands. And it was almost a weekly occurrence. He was definitely a predator of convenience. And my grandmother took one night a week to go do some self-care. She would go to bingo every Monday night. And I remember as a child just laying in our beds in our bedroom. We would hear our grandmother driving out of the driveway, and then we would sit there and just wait to hear my grandfather's footsteps on the stairs because we knew that it was going to come. And people ask me quite often why, 9 years, it's a long time to go through that without nothing being said. And I know for myself, I think feeling abandoned by my parents growing up, having my mom leave with my brothers, and then my dad not, being able to get sober to take care of us. I was terrified that if I said something that I would be taken away from my grandmother, and she was the only person that I had that I felt I could depend on. So my sister and I just suffered in silence for 9 years. And then My sister was 16 and she went to school one day and basically had a nervous breakdown because at 16, she was now terrified that she was going to become impregnated by my grandfather. And so she went to school, told the counselors at school, and everything, of course, came out. My grandfather was arrested, went to trial, was convicted, and went to jail. And we were left to try to pick up the pieces of this family that had now broken apart. And I grew up in a really small rural area. There was 2,500 people in the town that I grew up in, and it was a place where you couldn't really escape the fact that everybody knew what had happened. And as a child, I remember hearing, my friends that were kids come to school saying how their parents had said that, we were lying and that none of it was true. And we were just troubled kids because our parents didn't want us. And, I remember 12 thinking, I wish this was all just made up and not true. And I, remember dealing with social services. And of course, this is now the early 80s when all of the abuse has come out. And there's no real follow-up care. There was no counseling. There was no therapy. I just remember sitting in a social worker's office and her getting up and coming and patting me on the shoulder and just saying, Charlene, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. And I remember thinking at 12 and a half, already at that age, thinking, I don't know what that is. I have no idea what okay is supposed to look like. I don't know what okay is supposed to feel like because I've never really felt okay. I've always felt like the rug was just waiting to get pulled out from underneath me. And so this is the mindset that I went into high school with. I went in with unresolved trauma, and very quickly it started to rear its head in mental health struggles. I started suffering depression. I started cutting very early on as a way to cope with the overwhelming emotional pain. It was that distraction, that physical pain was a distraction from the emotional overwhelm that I was feeling. And then I started drinking heavily and smoking marijuana and anything I could do basically to numb the pain that I was feeling. And then I started writing as an outlet for the emotional pain. And of course, when you're writing about, suicide and depression and, abuse, it draws attention. And I remember getting pulled into by my teacher into the guidance counselor's office and having them set me up a visit with a school psychologist who came in and did a 4-hour assessment. I answered questionnaires, I talked. And at the end of that 4 hours, she sat across the desk and said, well, Charlene, I want you to know we're diagnosing you as manic depressive bipolar. And again, I'm 15 and a half, and this is before cell phones, so I couldn't just jump on and Google what that was supposed to be. I had no idea what it meant, other than to me, it just meant that I was crazy because that's how I felt. So to me, it was just another stigma that was placed on top of me. And, she looked across and said, but I want you to know you're going to be okay. You can book an appointment, come in to talk to us anytime. And again, I remember feeling really angry because here was another adult that was telling me I was going to be okay, but no one was helping me get to that point where I was going to be okay. And so I did what my grandmother had taught me to do. I just put my head down and got to work. All I could think of was that I wanted to get through school, move away, because if I just moved away, everything was going to be better. I would go somewhere where no one knew me and everything would be fantastic. Not knowing that, I was just carrying the trauma with me. It didn't matter where I went, but I finished high school. I moved away. I moved away with my high school sweetheart, and we decided rather quickly on that we were going to start a family. And I think I thought that by having a family, I was going to create this dream life that I had always wanted for myself and never had. I was going to, create that white picket fence life. And the problem was I didn't have any skills or tools emotionally or mentally to do that. So I have, 2 beautiful daughters, and then I had a son, and all the while feeling like with each child, I'm hoping that that hole that I feel inside of me is going to be fixed, that their love is going to be enough to make me feel loved and worthy. And of course, that's a lot of pressure to put on a child. But of course, that didn't solve anything. It just kind of created worse problems because I was still drinking heavily and I knew I wasn't being the mom that I had wanted to be. And so when I was 28, I remember sitting down with my husband, and I had been suffering very quietly with worsening mental health. And I had once again gotten suicidal, to the point where I was planning how I could end my life without it being my children that would find me. I wanted to just, take my life at home, but I was afraid they would be the ones that would come home from school and find my body. And I said to my husband, I need to leave the house right now. I'm not fit to look after myself, let alone 3 little children. And I can say that my marriage was basically over at this point, and he was fine with me leaving. So I moved away thinking that I was going to do the work to start healing, that I was going to try to get some help so I could be a good mom. And all that happened was I went down a rabbit hole spiral of guilt and shame, because now I felt like I had just done the same thing that my parents had done to me. Here I was a mother and I had just left my children. Here I was an adult who was allowing my alcoholism to take priority over, being a sober parent. And that shame and guilt just ate me up. And I started drinking worse and started taking, prescription medication. And it was about a month after I left my husband that I jumped into another relationship, because I felt this would be the person that would love me for me, because, he came into my life when I was a complete mess. So he must love me if he wants to be with me when I'm like this. But what I didn't realize was that, they say like attracts like, and he was dysfunctional as well. He was suffering from his own childhood trauma and his own alcoholism. And he was also addicted to drugs at that time. I wasn't aware of that, and unfortunately, when he drank, he became violent. So very quickly on in the relationship, I started experiencing domestic violence, and it kind of fit the narrative of what I thought I deserved at the time. I had so much shame for leaving my children that I almost felt like it was karma. This was the universe saying, this is what you get for repeating that generational pattern. And so I stayed in the relationship and I tolerated it. And about 2 years into the relationship, after an extremely bad night, he had left the apartment, and I decided that was it. I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I knew I needed to get out. And, I look back on it now and realize like leaving the relationship was never an option for the out. Ending my life was the option. And so I went to my medicine cabinet, I pulled out all the medication, and I took all the pills that were in there, the pain pills, sleeping pills. And then I sat down on my couch with a pad of paper and a pen, and I started writing my goodbye letters to my kids. And as difficult as that process was, sobbing, trying to explain to 3 little kids why you're leaving them in the most final way, it was the best thing I did, because I realized I couldn't go through with it. So I called a cab, I went to the emergency room, and I was sitting at the admissions desk explaining how I felt like I was overdosing, and I collapsed. And when I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with tubes down my throat. And my partner beside me in a chair crying, saying how sorry he was. And so I get discharged from the hospital. My mom contacts me. My partner had let her know that I was in the hospital and what had happened. And she said, Charlene, I think you need to move across the country, pack the kids up. We will help you make a fresh start. We're going to help you get on your feet again and get your life together. And it fit my pattern of, okay, great. Here's where the problem is. So I'll just go somewhere else and it'll be better there. So that's what I did. I packed myself and my kids up and I moved across the country. And about 6 months later, my partner contacted me and said that he loved me and he missed me and he wanted to be with me and everything was going to be different. And again, I sucked right into that because I so desperately wanted it to be true. I wanted someone to want to get well and to get help and, live a great life because of me, that I would be enough for them to do that. And of course, that wasn't what happened. And he moved across the country, moved in with me, and it continued another decade of abuse and dysfunction and alcoholism and violence. And it was July 1st. I remember it's Canada Day up here in Canada when he came home and said, I'm moving out. I don't want to be with you anymore. And I'm moving in with someone else. And of course, I was absolutely crushed. And he moved out. And I thought, okay, Charlene, now's our chance to get it together. We've got this. We're going to start pulling our lives together. We're going to get help. We're going to do the work we need to do. And I started down that path. And about 2.5 months after he left, he messaged me on a Tuesday and said, hey, can we get together and talk? And I was like, no, absolutely not. You've moved on. I'm moving on with my life. And I know if I see you, I'm just going to go back to the way it was. And he said, okay, well, I just want you to know I'm sorry for how things ended. And I was like, you know what? Things end the way they're supposed to. We may not recognize it at the time, but that's how it is. And that was the last thing I said to him. And 2 days later, I had a police officer walk into my place of work, and took me outside and informed me that my ex-partner had committed suicide. He had shot and killed himself. And again, I was devastated. I felt a little bit responsible. I felt like if I had spoken to him, maybe that wouldn't have happened. And it was a difficult thing to have to go tell my kids who, as dysfunctional as he had been, he had still been their dad for 13 and a half years. So to go home and tell them that he had taken his own life, it was very difficult for them. And I always say my biggest regret was that I was so wrapped up in my own grief and trauma that I wasn't there to support them in the way that they needed me to support them through it. And his death just put me on a downward spiral. About 2 weeks after his death, I was sitting with a good friend of mine and started telling her how angry I was. And she tried to reassure me that, that's normal. Anger is one of the stages of grief. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm not angry that he took his life. I'm angry he did it first. And that's takes people back when you say that, but I so desperately wanted to end my life. But being the person who was left behind after someone committed suicide and seeing the heartbreak and the pain and the turmoil and the chaos, all of those things that it created, how did I follow through on what I wanted so desperately, knowing how bad I was going to hurt everybody else? And so I did again what my grandmother taught me to do. I put my head down and just tried to convince myself that everything was okay. And about 6 months after that, maybe 8 months after that, I hit a dark spot again and realized I needed to go to therapy. I needed to get some help because I was on the edge, and I recognized that if I didn't get help, I was going to end up ending my life. And I went to see a psychiatrist, and I was about 3 appointments in, and she was a lovely lady. But my personality is very much, okay, just tell me what to do and I will do it. I'm not afraid of the hard work. Just, I need to know what to do. And of course, she wanted to talk about the past. And I was like, look, I know why I messed up. I don't need to go back there. I just need to go forward and tell me how to fix this. And so I said to her, can you just tell me how you dealt with your mental health illness? Like, how did you get better? And I remember seeing her eyes kind of glaze over and her saying, well, Charlene, I've never personally dealt with mental health struggles. And I'm thinking in that moment to myself, then how can you possibly sit there and explain to me that you understand how I feel? Because unless you've been there, unless you've sat in that darkness, you don't know what it's like. You can't understand how hard that is. And I think in that moment, I kind of emotionally checked out. I thought, like I've tried to get help. I can't even get help when I try. I'm done. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being in pain. I had developed fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain disorder. So I was physically, mentally in pain, and I was just tired. I was tired of trying to fight to keep that darkness at bay. So I left that appointment and I set a date for 30 days after that to end my life. I had just purchased a house, actually with life insurance money that I got from my ex-partner passing away. And I knew I needed to get all of my ducks in a row. I needed to, my son was still at home. I wanted to leave him as set up and equipped for a life without me as possible. And about 2 weeks before the date that I had set to end my life, a coworker of mine, a friend, approached me and said, "Hey, in 2 weeks, there's this workshop in the next town over. It's a woman's workshop. Would you like to come with me?" And I thought to myself, no, that's the last thing I want to do is go sit in a room full of women and pretend like I'm okay when I'm not. And she said, and I was like, no. And she was like, well, please, I'd really like to go, but I don't want to go by myself. And of course, that was my kryptonite. I always cared about looking after other people more than I ever cared about looking after myself. So I agreed to go with her. And I pulled in that Saturday morning to that workshop with my hunting rifle and the bullets in the backseat of my car, ready to go out Monday morning to the same location that my ex-partner had gone in. And I was going to shoot myself just like he had. And I walked into the room of the workshop and immediately felt sick to my stomach because I'm looking at this room full of women who, through my eyes, looked like they had it all together, well-dressed, excited, laughing, joking. They're happy to be there. And I'm sitting here feeling like a complete fraud because here I am just trying to get through 2 days before I take my life. So I sat down and I got through the first half of the Saturday. And, I remember coming back after lunch going, okay, we just have like the rest of today and half of tomorrow, and then we're done. And the speaker gets on stage after the lunch session, and she is bald. She is suffering from alopecia, so she has lost all of her hair. And this started when she was just a young child. So she started sharing her story about how she struggled with feelings of self-worth and self-love, and how she looked for outside validation from everybody in society, to tell her that she was worthy. And, she didn't have hair, so she didn't feel pretty. And how her entire life changed when she understood that loving herself was the most important thing that she could do, that she didn't need society or anyone else in her life to tell her that she was worthy, that she could give herself that gift. And I remember sitting in that chair and I'm kind of, listening to her story, and I can hear this little voice in the back of my head that says, "What about you?" And I remember thinking, yeah, how different would my life have been had I learned to love myself? Had I not stayed in, abusive relationships because I felt like at least I was being validated and loved, and that I, if I stopped trying to have someone validate me because of the abuse and because of my parents and the, what they had done to me as a child. And if I just loved myself, that would be enough. And of course, I just kind of brushed that off. And the next speaker gets on stage and she starts talking about living with mental health struggles and being suicidal, and how for 20 years she had struggled. And it was when she learned that she could stop fighting her depression and that she could learn to accept it as being a part of herself and love that part as well. Because as long as she loved it, she could pull that darkness in and let the light in, rather than trying to keep the darkness at bay, because that doesn't work. But if you pull it into you, you can allow the light to shine in. And that was her lesson of acceptance, accepting that as part of her. And I'm sitting there, and again, I'm thinking, I hear that little voice, "What about you?" And I'm thinking, yeah, what if I could have learned to live with my mental health struggles. Like, what if I could have found a way instead of letting it, end my life? What if I could have learned to accept it and loved that part of me as well? And again, I brush it off because I've made my decision. And the last speaker of the day gets up and he starts talking. It's a gentleman. He starts talking about his broken marriage, his alcoholism, his addiction to painkillers, and dealing with mental health and suicidal thoughts, and how he had spent a year trying to find a perfect mix of pain medication and alcohol so that he could commit suicide, but make it look like an accidental overdose, because he sold life insurance. So he knew how everything had to look. And it was the moment that he was allowed to have visitation with his kids. His wife had contacted, can you take the kids overnight? He said, sure. Never happened, but he took the kids overnight. And it was on that night that he found that mix of alcohol and painkillers. And as he was laying on his couch with his kids sleeping in the room next to him, knowing that that was it, he was dying and his kids were going to find him, that as he was laying there, he heard a little voice that said, no, not like this. There's more. And he was able to get to the phone and he called 911 and got to the hospital, and everything in his life changed. He got clean and sober. He got the help that he needed. He got into therapy, and he took his experiences that he had and knew that he wasn't alone in how he had been feeling. And now he was going around, he was sharing his experiences in hopes of reaching someone who maybe was going through the same thing that he was. And as I was sitting there, as he finished talking, I'm sitting in my chair and I'm kind of going like, what is going on right now? Like, I remember almost looking around, like, is there a hidden camera here? And thinking, well, wait, no one knows what you're planning. Because I'm thinking, how is this possible that, number one, I'm at an event that I didn't want to come to, and I have just heard 3 stories that have touched on the areas of my life where I have struggled the most with, and that have put me on the brink of death. Like, this can't be accident that I am sitting here right now. And it was kind of in that moment that, I say a light switch moment, where I was like, well, wait a minute. Maybe everything I've gone through in my life has been for a reason. And maybe that purpose is to do what, these people are doing, to share my story so that the people that are alone and feel alone and are in that darkness know that really they're not alone, that there is hope, there's help. And I made that decision sitting in that chair that, you know what, I want to live, because I feel like there's more. And I feel like I heard these messages at this point because I had finally gotten quiet enough inside. That internal fight that I had been going through of live or die had ended. And I was quiet enough to finally hear the messages that I was meant to hear. And so I made my decision to live. And I remember approaching the workshop organizer after it was over, and because I wanted her to know what this event had meant to my life, that it had actually saved my life. And I had said to her, I would love to come and speak at your event next year, because I want people to understand that the power that an event like this can have. And so I went back the following year and I spoke at her event. And I remember sharing my story, just like I did today, on her stage, and saying that, I share my story with the hopes that it will reach the person who needs to hear it. And I believe firmly that it will reach the person that needs to hear the message. And that if by me sharing my story, I can save one person's life, then everything I have gone through in my life has been worth it. And I got off the stage, and I remember I was trying to make a beeline out of the room because I was so nervous after speaking. But I had a woman that was in the audience stop me. And she said, Charlene, you know how you said you wanted to save a life? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, I just want you to know today you did. And she turned and walked away. And it was a moment of, everything was so quiet. And I was kind of like, what did she just say? Like, I was kind of in shock. And as I'm standing there, I hear that little voice in my head that said, okay, now let's go find one more. So for me, every day is trying to take an opportunity to share my story, to break the stigma, and to find that one more person who needs, to know that they're not alone and that there's hope. And that's why I am honored to be here with you today and share that.
Once again, listen to I Am Refocused Radio, talking to Charlene Madden. You can go to her website, charlenemadden-speaker.com. And yeah, I just let you have the whole floor. I did not need to ask any questions on this interview today. Very powerful story. I say sometimes our pain or that we have can be someone else's medicine, especially if we are able to survive that pain. You never know who you can inspire and change their direction and how they live their life. So I think what you just said in this interview will definitely catch someone's attention and change their direction as well. Yeah, first and foremost, thanks for sharing your story. And for those
thank you
who may need extra help because you survived this, what words of encouragement will you give to anyone listening based on the fact that you personally survived what you've been through?
Yeah, I think when I work with my clients, I try to teach a 3S and a 3S philosophy, and it comes from what I experienced. That's, self-love. Just know that you are worthy of love. And, the most important love that you can get in this lifetime is going to be the love that you can give yourself. And sometimes that's really difficult because we do things in our life that, we don't feel, we should love ourselves because of it. But just give yourself grace and know that whatever you're going through in your life, you are doing the best you can with the tools that you have. And just know that if you're not okay today, it's okay. I mean, we have this perception in society that, we have to have it together all the time. And I just want you to know it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to if you're struggling, that's okay. Embrace that and say, today I'm not having a great day. Tomorrow will be better. And just take it one day at a time. And I get it. It sometimes you're taking it 1 second at a time, because that's where I was at. I was just trying to get through each second of the day and survive. But just know that, you can do it. And if you're struggling, there is something on the other side of that that's so great that, it's hard to even see it. I mean, I look at my life now and I never would have thought that, 6 years ago, I would be where I am now. But, I realized that going through that fire, and I embraced the feeling of a phoenix, that, I rose from the ashes, but to get to that ashes, I had to burn down. So, just know that you can rise up from whatever you're going through. And if you've got a struggle, there are other people, you're not alone. So just give yourself that love, acceptance, and know that you're worth it.
Once again, they can go to your website, charlenemadden-speaker.com, and your resources, services that you provide, and coaching people and helping them on their new journey. And I guess I can say just start a new chapter in their life. I'll let you have the last words. What would you like to tell our audience and the best way they can connect to you?
Yeah, every podcast I'm on, I try to sneak the message in that just know one of the parts of being stuck in depression is you feel really alone. And I just want, if you're listening to this, to know, if you're hearing this, the message is for you, that you're not alone. I am available. You can find me on all the social media platforms. And I want people to know, message me. If you feel like you have no one in your life that understands or that you can talk to, please reach out to me on social media. I tell people I will come and sit in the dark with you. Of course, it's going to be virtually, but I will come and sit and hold space for you to go through what you're going through, but you're not going to be alone. So please, if you don't feel like you have anyone to talk to, just know you do. And that's me. So please reach out, and there's lots of resources available, but I will be there if you need someone to talk to.
Once again, listen to I Am Refocused Radio, talking to Charlene Madden, speaker, author, empowerment coach. Want to say once again, go to our website, charlenemadden-speaker.com. And also want to say thank you, Charlene, for taking time out of your busy schedule talking to I Am Refocused Radio today.
And thank you for hosting this platform. I mean, to do these podcasts, I know is a lot of work and a lot of time and effort put into it. So thank you for the ripples that you're creating and the healing that you're creating around the world. So thank you.
I Am Refocused Radio is brought to you by 404 Star and Holy Crab. 404 Star is a family-owned Asian restaurant in San Antonio, Texas. We have been a local favorite for Asian cuisine for over 10 years. With nothing but full smiles and fast service, you'll be leaving satisfied. Come on in for some authentic Vietnamese food. Holy Crab is one-of-a-kind Cajun Creole-style seafood restaurant located in Universal City, Texas. We offer traditional seafood items as well as chicken and steak. We also offer seafood boils. Come give us a try. You won't be disappointed. You can find these two eateries in Universal City, Texas at 2921 Pat Booker Road.